Back in my rock and roll days there. My name is Brent. I'm an alcoholic. Like, thank Scott for, one, inviting me up here, and two, took me out to dinner, and I met a lot of you there at the meal, and it was wonderful. The hospitality and the enthusiasm in this room makes me excited, and I love that. If you all do not get anything else out of my share tonight, I want you to understand one thing. Everything good in my life today is because of Alcoholics Anonymous. Everything that I have is because of this program. So I hope you understand that by the time I get through. Good to see my friend Jimmy here tonight. I have a sobriety date, August 27th, 1996. I have a sponsor. My sponsor has a sponsor, and I have a home group. And to me, those things are extremely important. If any of you are ever in Los Angeles on a Wednesday night, please stop by the Pacific Group and you'll get a warm welcome. My sponsor, I probably need every bit as much today as I did on day one or day two, because sometimes my life can get going really wonderful, and maybe sometimes I take a little credit that I'm the reason it's getting wonderful. And that's when I need that sponsor to put me back in check and remind me that, no, it's not because of me, it's because of this program and my higher power. And he will also inform me it's because he kicks me in the butt sometimes too. So I'll tell you a little bit about who I was, what happened to me because of the disease of alcoholism, and where my life is today because of this amazing program. I was born and raised in southwest Missouri on an Angus beef farm in the absolutely middle of nowhere, and I hated every minute of my childhood. Growing up on that farm, I idolized my father. Everything I did to get my father to tell me he was proud of me, to give me a pat on the back, and to tell me that he loved me. That's just not who my father was. I guess I should backtrack a little bit. I was an only child. Now, most of you automatically in the back of your mind going, only child, he was spoiled, he didn't have any hand-me-downs, he didn't have to share anything. I quit arguing with people about that decades ago. But on the flip side, I want you to see this side of the picture. If the chores did not get done, if something did get broken around the house, I also didn't have a brother or sister to blame it on, so it goes both ways. But with my father, he was the type of man that if I brought a B home from school, he wanted to know why it wasn't an A. If I did bring an A home from school, he says, that's the reason you go to school. Alcoholism runs rampant in my family. That is not the reason I am an alcoholic. It's just the life I grew up in. Neither one of my grandfathers ever saw the age of 60, and my uncle died at the age of 42 because of this disease. I took my first drink when I was 9. The reason I did that was real simple. After first and second grade, I already learned real quick. I did not know how to talk to other kids. I did not know how to socialize. I didn't know how to participate at recess. I did not know how to be part of the group. I knew 100% that every kid in that room was making fun of my boots because they was old. They had dirt on them from the farm. He was making fun of my jeans because they was ripped. Now, in today's world, I would fit in because people pay extra to buy jeans that already have pre-rips in them. Back in my day, if you had rips, you was just poor and you couldn't afford new ones. But I knew you all were making fun of me. And every time I stepped in that classroom, I was full of fear of what you thought about me because I knew that I was less than. In the summer I turned 9, I used to watch my uncle and my dad and my grandpa sit underneath a tree. They'd drink beer and listen to the St. Louis Cardinals play baseball. And that one afternoon, I realized when they drank 1 or 2, their smiles got a little bit bigger. When they drank 3 or 4, they started laughing, they started enjoying, they started telling stories. And by the time the afternoon was over, especially if the Cardinals won, they were having a great time. So that day I realized there must be something special that's in those cans. So when they told me to take the old ones back and get fresh ones, if there's anything left, I downed it that night. And if there's every new can I took the biggest drink I could off of them. And before that afternoon was over, I had this little buzzy feeling inside me. But the key was it made me feel different. And I realized that's what I had been looking for, was to feel different, because that afternoon I walked a little bit faster back and forth. My smile was a little bit bigger, and I found magic in those cans, and that's what I chased for the next 25 years. Growing up in a small town, if any of you know anything about small communities, if you're even halfway good at sports, you get a lot of breaks and a lot of favoritisms. I'm going to say I was better than average, because when I turned 12, they started having me play ball with the 14-year-olds. Well, their drinking had reached a level that I hadn't gotten to yet, but it did not take me long to get there. And I started stealing from my grandpa or my dad or something to bring the beers out to hang out with the guys. And the only thing I realized was that on Monday, everyone was talking about me because I'd made a fool of myself over the weekend drinking with them guys, but I liked it because I got attention. When I was 16 years old, there was 5 carloads of us coming back from a float trip. The lead car had a wreck and one of the girls was killed. Her parents and mine had known each other before Joe and I was even born, and they asked me to be one of the pallbearers. Morning of the funeral, I showed up drunk. I stumbled carrying the casket, and I made a real fool out of myself. And that was the first time people started telling me maybe I need to slow down. And my attitude to them was real simple. This is the way I'm handling things, so just leave me alone. My junior year, that little small town had one of the best ball teams they'd had probably in over 20 years. We ended up making it to the state. We lost in the quarterfinals, and I probably played the best game I'd ever played. And I just knew my dad was going to be proud of me when I got home, even though we lost. I did not get 3 steps in the door, and he started telling me what I did wrong in the second half. If I'd have passed here, if I'd have shot here, maybe we'd won, maybe we'd be playing for the state championship. So I learned real quick that it really did not matter what I did. My dad was never going to give me that attention, that approval that I was looking for. My senior year, I started throwing keggers on the backside of the farm. I did not care what kind of trouble I got in with my dad. All I knew was on Friday afternoon, people were coming to me to ask me which gate to come into, what time could they show up, when was the party, and I liked that everybody was coming to me. Graduated high school, figured I'd be like most everybody else in that little town. You marry your high school sweetheart, you get a job, you raise a family there, and a lot of people end up dying there. Well, my dad had other plans. He wanted me to go to college. Well, that's the last thing I wanted to do because I hated school when I was in there. So that summer, when all my buddies are getting their own place, starting their own life, I'm stuck out on the farm. That fall, I packed up, headed off to school, and I will tell you all on about day 2 or 3, I joined a fraternity, and I thought I had fallen into paradise, because back in 1980 and 81, nobody was telling you couldn't really drive and drink, and fraternities had beer flowing 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and there was nobody in my life now telling me I need to slow down on my drinking. They told me I need to drink more, and I had found my people, and that's exactly what I did. But it was that same scenario with my father. When I brought that B and that C home, he wanted to know why it wasn't an A. When I did bring that A home, he said, that's the reason I sent you there. But my drinking started having consequences. My sophomore year, I started losing friends. People didn't want to hang out with me. People didn't want to ride in the car with me. I drove stupid, I drove crazy, and I paid no attention to anyone else. Other fraternities started banning me from their parties. They didn't want me there because I started fights and no one wanted me around. My junior year, for whatever reason, I got probably one of the greatest jobs anybody in college could ever have. I became the Anheuser-Busch distributor rep for the college campus. And I'm telling you, all those fraternities that had banned me, they all wanted me right back in. They wanted me to put the big Busch blow-up can in the yard, hand out T-shirts, hand out this. I knew they didn't want me back any more than they did before, but they wanted what I could give them. But things started happening my junior year. Alcohol wasn't working. I could not drink enough to quiet the voices that was going on in my head. I could be in a room just like this and I would be all alone. Alcohol was no longer fun, but I had to have it. Somehow I graduated my senior year, I got my degree, I got a job, I'm living my life, I'm paying my bills, and I am one miserable human being. 2 years after I got out, I was working. My mom gave me a call, said that my dad was getting older. Is there any way I could come home and help out on the farm? So I made arrangements. I took a week off work, Got home on a Sunday afternoon, woke up Monday morning, he had a list of chores that needed to be done. One of the first things listed on there was he needed a section of the barn painted. So that morning I got up, I grabbed my beer, I headed out to the barn. He had all this paint that he bought, and I thought, well, that's absolutely ridiculous. I can use about half that paint that section, save him some money, and we'll get the week started off on the right foot. When he came out later that afternoon, he did not tell me I did a good job. He did not tell me I did a bad job. He just asked me why I didn't use all the paint. I said I didn't need to, saved you some money, and got the job done. He said if I wanted to save the money, I wouldn't have bought so much. He goes, I bought it because I wanted you to use it. You might say 25 years of me trying to get that man's approval all come to a head that afternoon. My father and I proceeded to get into a heated argument, and I murdered him that day. I'll never know what I did to my mother. That lady stood beside me from day one, second one. And if any of you know anything about a small town, they talked about her unmercifully. 3 days later, she bailed me out, and my drinking took a turn that I did not know it even knew how. It was complete darkness. I drank in the morning, I drank in the afternoon, I drank at night. I would pass out, wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I would drink more. And that's what I did for the next 10 months. I went to court. I was convicted of second-degree murder, armed criminal action, and given 2 life sentences. I went to prison October 3rd, 1987. It took this alcoholic exactly 13 days to learn what to steal out of the kitchen to cook homemade wine, and that's what I proceeded to do. And when I could not steal the ingredients out of the kitchen to cook up a batch of hooch, I would buy a 6-ounce bottle of aftershave out of the canteen, cook it down to a 1-ounce shot, and I would drink it. I would put anything inside my system, anything inside my body to quiet the voices in my head. Now, my mother and my grandmother never wavered their love and support for me. They drove 2.5 hours every single Thursday to come visit me. And when I was cooking that hooch and I had something inside to keep the voices in my head quiet, when they walked in the visiting room, I told them how much I loved them. I gave them a big hug for coming to visit me. I thanked them for bringing that little bag of quarters so I could get a sandwich out of the vending machine, and we would sit there and visit for 5.5 hours. And that's pretty much how I got through almost the first 4 years in prison. Then on January the 1st, 1992, after cooking up a big batch on New Year's Eve, I woke up in my cell floor in my own blood, my own puke. The hooch that I was cooking was literally burning my stomach lining out. I still refuse to admit that I was an alcoholic, but I've done such a great job of running my life to this point in time, I decided to make another change. I decided just to quit drinking. And the reason I share this with you is this, because the next 4+ years, I really believe I might have been one of the most meanest, most miserable human beings there was. Because when my mother and grandmother would come visit me, my attitude to them was totally different when I didn't have anything inside there to quiet the voices in my head. When they walked into the visiting room, I'd be, "Where have you been? The visiting room opened 19 minutes ago. I've been waiting." I know there was times I didn't hug them. I know there's times I didn't thank them. And they probably left sometimes and I didn't even tell them I loved them anymore. But I can sure tell you I complained every week that there wasn't enough quarters in that bag to where I could get 2 sandwiches out of the vending machine instead of 1. Now, I had a job in there with a couple guys, worked out, and they had been on me for the last 2 years, telling me I was an alcoholic, said I need to go to AA meetings. I told them I haven't had anything to drink in over 4 years. I've been listening to this all my life, and no, I'm not, so just leave me alone. Well, the problem was I had a fuse that was about this short because I didn't know how to deal with anything else. And I said, if one of you don't shut up, I'm going to swing on you. So what have we got to do to solve this? They said, you go to an AA meeting, we'll leave you alone. I said, I'm not buying it. I go to one meeting and you two will never say another word to me. And they said, guaranteed. So I signed up. It took 2 weeks to get on the call out in prison. Sunday afternoon, they called for AA. I went into the room. I sat in the back left-hand corner. I stared at the floor. Absolutely did not introduce myself. I did not hold your hands. I did not participate in any prayers. I did not do anything that you all were doing. I stared at the floor and wondered when the 60 minutes was going to be up. And when it was, I got up. I walked out of the room, Probably tripped over one chair and pushed two out of my way and headed back to my cell. And the only thing I could think about the whole time going back was, let's see if these two guys leave me alone. And you know what they did? They didn't say a word to me on Monday. They didn't say a word to me on Tuesday, nor Wednesday, nor all week long. And the only thing that I can ever share with anybody who will ever listen to me for the rest of my life is something happened to me that night that I did not understand. Because that following Sunday when they called AA over the intercom, I went back to that room. And I sat in that same chair and I stared at the floor and I talked to myself for 60 minutes and I asked myself, why am I back here? And I did that for nearly 3 months before I ever said a word in that meeting. And then one night I actually paid attention to what those men were saying. And they were talking just 100% about me. They talked about how they was full of fear of what people thought about them. They talked about how they never had the right car, they never had the right girlfriend, their parents didn't live in the right neighborhood, they didn't have the right clothes. And that night I grabbed a big book off the table and I took it back to my cell. And I read a few pages and I thought, well, this stuff isn't no big deal. What's everybody talking about? Then I'd read that one more paragraph and it started talking about me, and I'd throw that book on my bunk and it'd lay there for 2 or 3 days. And then I cycled through like that. And about 10 months into this, the 3 men who were bringing the meeting into their prison put on what they called a big book workshop. So I signed up to participate. I thought I had nothing else to do, plus it got me out of my cell one more night a week. I went in there. First thing they asked was, does everybody have a big book? Second thing, they handed out papers. So I started looking at it, and I thought it was just stuff for us to read, but then I noticed they had questions and lines for us to fill out and put answers on it. And in my mind, I'm like, I've totally lost it. I hated school when I was in school. I'm in prison with 2 life sentences, and I've signed up for something that's giving me homework. I said, what have I done? But those 15 weeks changed my life. For the first time at the age of 34 years old, I admitted I was an alcoholic. During those 15 weeks, I started to realize that I was accountable for everything that had happened in my life, and I needed to take responsibility. And during those 15 weeks, I realized something, that my father was really a good man. He loved me the only way he knew how. It just wasn't what I needed. And when those 15 weeks was up, I asked one of those 3 men if he would sponsor me and take me through the steps. And I learned real quick that you all in the free world was crazier than I was. Because he said yes, and every other Sunday he came in an hour before the meeting to take me through the steps. And I got through steps 1, 2, and 3, and I did my first inventory and shared it with him. And I did 6 and 7. And then we got to 8 and 9, and he came in that evening, and I said, well, Harold, we're done. And he had a little grin, and he said, we are. He said, how did you come up with that answer? I said, well, it's pretty simple. I can make a list of amends, but they are not letting me out that front gate to go make amends to anybody, so we're pretty much at a standstill till whenever I get out of prison. He said, I understand your thought pattern, but that's a wrong answer. I said, well, then you explain it to me. He said, well, first off, you're going to get 3 by 5 cards I know to sell out of the canteen. You're going to put everybody's name on there that you owe an amends to, how you played your part in it, how you harmed them. And he says, we're going to start there. And I said, that's great. I can do all that, but I'm still not going to be able to get out the door to make an amends. He says, you're already making amends and you don't know it. And I said, and how does that? He said, what do you just told me about your visit with your grandmother about a month earlier? And what I told him was, I went on a visit. My grandmother said it was so good to see her grandson again. And I said, Grandma, you see me every week. What are you talking about? And she said, no, my grandson has light behind his eyes. And it talks about in the big book how others will see changes in us before we ever see it in ourselves. And I'm so grateful I was given that opportunity with her, because she passed away less than 5 months later. Now, my mom, I have no idea what she truly endured because of me. And I probably will always feel I never made the amends that she really needed to have. But she was dealing with cancer, and it came out of remission for the third time, and she told me on a visit that she was just too tired to fight it anymore. And she ended up passing away long before I ever got out. But she had done something for me that I didn't realize until I found out later. So I need to backtrack with you here. When I went to prison, I tried to drag a lady and two girls into that cell with me. And I'll be honest, if I could have brought my dog in there, I'd have brought the dog in that cell so I wouldn't have been so lonely. But she lasted about 18 months, and she said she couldn't do this anymore, and she had to leave. And I give her a lot of credit. I'm a selfish SOB. I wouldn't have lasted 18 days. But she had been in communication with my mom. And I got a letter from this lady one night and had her return address up in the left-hand corner. And I go back to my cell, being the good alcoholic I am at this point in time. Instead of just opening up and reading it, I run through my head. She's going to tell me how I ruined her life, what a worthless piece of human being I am, and all these things. So I came up with 4,327 scenarios of what she wrote in that letter. After I drove myself crazy for 3 days, I finally opened it up, and it was real plain and real simple. She says, "Here's my phone number. Will you give me a call?" Well, I knew I could not wait 3 more days because I would have been crazy. So I went down, I got in line and made the call. And she said, "Am I still on your visiting list?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "I'd like to come visit you." I said, "Why?" And she said, "Because I'd been talking to your mother, and she said you've been making some changes in your life." And about 3 weeks later, this lady come to visit me. And for the first time in my life, I carried on a conversation with a woman without any ulterior motives. Didn't have to worry about what restaurant she wanted to go to, and I could care less about it. Didn't worry about what movie she wanted to see, and I sure did not want to sit through for 2 hours. State of Missouri does not have conjugal visits, so sex was off the table. So we just sat there and visited. And for the first time in my life, I talked to a woman. And for whatever reason, you would have to ask her or my higher power, who I choose to call God, she wanted to wait on me. And we got married in the visiting room of prison, and she waited on me till I walked out of prison. Now, even with 2 life sentences, you get to go see the parole board in the state of Missouri. So I went up that first time, and I was arrogant, and I thought, I've admitted I was an alcoholic. I'm starting to make amends. I've got my family back. They're going to see what a changed man I am. They're going to give me a second chance at life. I walked in that parole hearing that lasted 6 minutes, and they said, "Mr. Huff, we'll see you in 5 years." And I walked out of that room, and I cussed God, and I cussed AA, and I got on the phone that night, and I told Debbie to file for divorce. This is the stupidest thing she could have done. I am never going home. Get the girls out of here, move on with your life, and let's be done with it. Well, I whined and cried like that for 3 nights on a phone conversation. On that third night, she just point blank cut me off, and she said, "Are you done?" And I'll tell y'all, I'd heard that voice before, so I knew my next answer better be the right one. I said, "I can be." She said, "Well, good. I'm not going anywhere. The girls aren't going anywhere, and we're going to get through this." And that night, I changed my life. Instead of waiting till 6 a.m. count to get up, I set an alarm. I got up 15 minutes early. I read my daily reflections. I read a section out of the big book, and I said a prayer. And I did that every single morning for 5 years. I went up for parole that second time. Lasted about 13 minutes, and they said, "Mr. Huff, we'll see you in 2 years." And my pity potty lasted a couple hours because I knew what was coming on the other end of that phone conversation. But that second night, I changed my life again. I got up 30 minutes before 6 o'clock count. And I read out of the daily reflections, I read out of the big book, and whatever month it was, I read that step. And I said my prayers, and I did that every single morning. I went up for parole the third time. It lasted 57 minutes. It took them 73 days to give me an answer, and they said, "Mr. Huff, we'll see you in 2 more years." And for the first time, I was good with that answer. Because if I got out when I wanted to, there's a very good chance I would have died or I would have destroyed everything that I could have got my hands on. Because if I got out when I wanted to, I had not worked the steps thoroughly. I knew nothing about the traditions. I did not have the foundation of this program, and I would have destroyed everything. During those next 2 months, when I brushed my teeth in the morning, I liked that guy I saw looking back at me in the mirror. I found a freedom living in a 7-foot by 9-foot maximum security prison cell that I had never experienced living on the street. I started working with other inmates in there to the best of my ability. And I got through those 2 years. I went up again, and they granted me an out date. I walked out of prison October 3rd, 2008, 21 years to the day. And there is not one thing that I did to get those doors to open. My higher power, who I choose to call God, and this program did. Because with 2 life sentences, when I was sentenced in 1987, I should have done 15 years on each. I should have done 30 years. I got out in 21. Now, I will tell you all this, though. You go to prison in 1987, you get out in 2008. A lot of things had changed, and I didn't really fit in anymore. First off, you have these things. Didn't know anything about them. You had the internet. You had Google. You had Siri. I had a car that had 2 keys, one to start it, one to unlock it. Now you got little beeper fobs. Everybody's setting them off in the parking lot. And I didn't really fit in. But let me tell you about my first 30 days out. I got home on a Friday afternoon. Saturday morning, 2 men knocked up my door. I opened the door, and I will tell you all my first thought was they came to take me back. And then when they asked me what my name was, they said, "Are you Brent?" And I said, "Yes." And said, "Harold L. told us to take you to a meeting." I went to my first AA meeting less than 24 hours out of prison. Sunday afternoon, my wife told me I need to go downstairs and go through a couple boxes that was down there. I thought there were things of my mom, my grandma. I said, "I'm not ready for that." She said, "It's not their stuff, but you do need to go see these boxes." So I went downstairs, and there was 2 boxes, and they had gifts in them. And I started picking the gifts up, and it said, "Merry Christmas, Dad, 2004. Happy Birthday, Dad, 2001. And the reason I share this with you is that every gift in those boxes was dated after 1996 when I went to my first AA meeting. And that told me just how powerful this program truly is. And then Monday came, and I did realize immediately that you all in the free world was crazier than I was. A gentleman invited me to his home. He cooked me a steak dinner. We was going to go to an AA meeting. But the reason I knew you all was crazy was this. He had a 6-month-old son. I said, "Why would you invite someone like me who's been out of prison 3 days into your home with your 6-month-old son?" He said, "Because those 3 men that's been bringing that meeting into prison, those 3 men are in my life. And they told me that you have done everything they have asked you for the past 12 years. And I'm just going to give back what was so freely given to me." And I started learning what friendship was about. And I started learning what the fellowship of this program was all about. Now, my sponsor told me if you're ever asked to do anything, you say yes unless you have a prior commitment. And he said, if anyone ever asks you to share your story, you say yes. And I said, "Well, Harold, there is going to be no one asked me to share my story." He said, "Don't worry about it. I got it set up. You're sharing your story October 31st. I was out of prison 24 days, and I shared my story for the first time. I was petrified, scared to death. I was at the podium. I was sweating because I knew when you all heard what I'd done, you'd walk out the back door of church. And I still to this day do not know if it helped me or hurt me, but half of you were in Halloween costumes that night. And when I got done, you all changed my perspective of who you all were. You all got in a line, you came and shook my hand or gave me a hug. And I realized that I was finally with my people. Now, I couldn't get a job. When I tell you I could not get a job, I'm telling you I could not get a job because I had to check in every week with my parole officer, and she continued to tell me every week how many times I had been turned down, and I got turned down 434 times. And I was whining to my parole officer, I was whining to my sponsor, and my sponsor finally cut me off and said, "Did you ever think maybe you're not supposed to have a job yet?" And of course I looked at him and I said, "Have you lost your mind?" "No, because every week my PO's on me, my wife's want me to help pay bills." I said, "Why would you say something like that?" And he said, "Because maybe you're just supposed to get used to your family. Maybe they're just supposed to get used to you, and a job will come when it's supposed to." Of course, I had the committee spinning real quick in my head, and I said, "Damn sponsors." But about 6 months later, I shared my story, and a gentleman came up to me afterwards, and he handed me his card, and he said, "If you really need a job, give me a call." I went out and saw him the next morning. He hired me right there on the spot, AA doing for me what I could not do for myself. I worked for this man for a little over a year. It was some pretty hard labor. I ended up getting hurt. They had to put a plate in my neck. I couldn't really do the lifting for him anymore, so we parted ways, but I'll always be grateful for that man. This was right around Thanksgiving. I was about done with my rehab. About 20 of us went out to dinner and went to a meeting. A gentleman was back in town who was visiting. He asked me how things were going. I ran it all down to him. He said, don't worry. He wrote a man's name down, the phone number down. He said, give him a call when Thanksgiving's over. So I gave him a call, went and interviewed with him. Make a long story short, he said, I appreciate your honesty. He said, let me talk to the family that owns this dealership and I'll get back with you. Following week, he gave me a call and he said, when can you start? I looked at the clock. I said, I'm pretty sure I can be there in 20 minutes. He said, well, why don't we wait till Monday? I said, yes, sir. I started off at that car dealership as a porter cleaning cars. I became a salesman. The last 3 years I was a salesman. I was the #1 salesman in the district. I became a finance manager. I became a sales manager. And I became the general sales manager of a Chrysler Dodge Jeep Ram store. There is no way on the face of this earth anyone with my past should be given that much responsibility. I had the security code to lock the dealership up at night and to unlock it in the morning. I had access to keys to 300 new cars and keys to 200 used cars. And the only reason I was given that responsibility is because of every one of you in this room. You told me to come to these rooms, get in the middle and stay in the middle. Don't hang out on the edge. Get a commitment, get involved, and be a part of it. You said work hard, work smart, work honest, and miracles will happen when they're supposed to. And that's what I did. Now, we'll backtrack here real quick. Man, those 3x5 cards I told you my sponsor I had to do, when we got out, we started going through them, and I started making amends. But there was one I'd always zip to the back real quick so he couldn't see it. Well, of course, he saw it every time, and after about the 4th time, he said, don't you think maybe we need to address that card? I said, I don't know how. And it was amends to my father. And he said, well, this is what we're going to do. I give you 15 days. You write your dad a letter. We're going to get in the car, we're going to drive 3 hours to the grave site, and you're going to read that letter to him. And that's what we did. My sponsor walked with me to his grave site. I got on my knees, I read the letter. My sponsor had his hand on my shoulder the entire time, and when I got done, he walked away. When I left the cemetery that day, I believe that my dad has forgiven me. I believe my dad is proud of who I am becoming. I can never make the direct amends that ever undo what I did, but I try to do the best I can by making a living amends by every morning that I wake up. Now, I know some of you that were new, you've raised your hand, said you was in your first 30 days, and a lot of you took chips for under a year. I don't want to give anyone the illusion you walked in these rooms and everything's going to be great, everything's going to be perfect, because you know what? Life is life, and everybody in this room has to deal with the ups and the downs. That woman who came back into my life, married me, and we waited on me till I got out, she ended up being in a horrific accident. She spent 9 months in ICU. COVID hit at the end of it. I couldn't get in to see her. I caused a big enough scene one night at the hospital that they put a gown on me. They said they gave me 5 minutes. I went into the room. I got in there. She started crying. She says, please don't leave me in here. I do not want to die alone. So I made a decision that night, and I signed a stack of papers. It was just like you buying a mortgage on a home. I called the girls. I said, I'm bringing your mom home. We set up hospice. They both took off work. They moved back into the house, and we were all together the last 19 days before she passed away. And you all do what you all do. You showed up to that funeral home for visitation. You brought food, made coffee, brought sodas. You surrounded me with love, and you gave me space when I needed it. And my 2 brother-in-law said, who are all these people? I said, that's my other family. That's my AA family. They did not understand, but you all saved my life. Now, I really thought that that would be my life, and I would be very happy with where I had come. I figured I'd live in St. Louis, Missouri. I'd work at that car dealership till I was probably 68 or 70 years old, and I would have been very good with that. But when I stay out of the way and I let my higher power take control, God had a different plan for me. I was supposed to speak in Dallas, Texas at an AA conference in August of 2020. Everything got shut down because of COVID. got canceled. August 22 came around. Stu gave me a call, said, let's try this again. He said, do you think you can come down with everything going on? I said, absolutely. He said, why don't you come down 2 days earlier? We'll play golf, eat some good barbecue, and then we'll head to the conference. I said, this is sounding better all the time. Then about 6 weeks before the conference, I get a call. It's from Stu. I thought he's just checking up to make sure everything was good, and he says, we got a problem. In the back of my mind, I'm already going, well, this isn't going to be good. I said, what's that? And he said, the hotel double booked. He said, they moved the AA conference back 2 weeks. Can you still make it? I said, I'll make arrangements. I'll figure something out. And he says, well, then we got one more problem. He says, 2 weeks later, I've got a commitment at another conference, so I won't even be there. So you can't come down 2 days early. We can't play golf. We can't eat some good barbecue. But he says, I got a sponsee. He'll pick you up and take you to the hotel, and he'll take care of you. We hung up, and my mind's like, well, this just really sucks. I'm like, I wanted to play golf, and I wanted to eat some barbecue every night, and it's just like, whatever, I'm going to go do this. So his sponsee picked me up, took me to the hotel, and for all of you out here who've got sponsees, you know this stuff happens sometimes. He just drove away. So I'm standing in the lobby of this hotel in Dallas, Texas, not knowing one person. I get checked in, I come back down. This lady comes up to me and she goes, you one of the speakers? And I had this little speaker tag on. I said, yes. She goes, where's your host? So I started to explain it to her. She just cut me off. She goes, yeah, I already know all about that. She goes, why don't you just come to dinner with me? She goes, I got a couple other speakers. We're going out to dinner. You'll get to know everybody, and we'll do that. And I said, that sounds wonderful. So that evening, went, had dinner. One of the ladies there was not supposed to be there. She literally was filling in the last 12 days for a woman who had surgery and couldn't fly and couldn't travel, so they asked her to fill in at the last moment. She was not even supposed to be there. We ended up hitting it off. Her best friend says we were sparking. I'll be real honest, I had not been on a date in 37 years, so I really don't know what I was doing. But that weekend I heard her share. She heard me share. She was still talking to me. And we proceeded to date long distance for a little over a year. Now here's the AA world a little bit tighter. She lives in Los Angeles, California. I live in St. Louis, Missouri. Her sponsor and my sponsor had known each other for over a decade. They'd been at conferences together, workshops together. So when I breached the subject that things were getting serious, they already knew everything about it because she had shared with her and I'd shared with Harold. I could not really ask Yvonne to move to St. Louis because she just made partner in a law firm. Yes, she was an attorney and she still was talking to me. So I figured, we'll see what happens about me moving to LA. It's like, I work in the car business. It's not life-threatening or anything. So I put my house up for sale. 9 hours later, I had 4 offers. I closed in 18 days. I gave a 30-day notice at the dealership. Most people in my life told me that I had lost my mind. I was crazy to be moving to California and giving up everything I knew in Missouri. But that little kid that I told you about at the beginning, he was so full of fear, whatever one of you thought about me, I did not care because I knew in my heart this is where I was supposed to be and what I was supposed to do. And I packed up and I moved to Los Angeles, California. I did not have a job. I had no opportunity, but nothing felt more right in my life than this move. I came out here 2 weeks later. I ended up having lunch with the president and CEO of the Midnight Mission. He hired me on the spot, and I've been working there for over the last 2 years. My sponsor told me a long time ago that if I want to stay sober, I need to always do 2 things. 1, I need to always work with a newcomer. 2, I need to go somewhere once a week that I never want to end up. That man is still taking message into prisons in Missouri. He has been doing it ever since 1996. I have gotten new sponsees since I've been out here. I still got a couple of sponsees in Missouri, and I go into the heart of Skid Row 5 days a week, and I can tell every one of you, I will help them people as much as I can, but I absolutely do not want to end up there. Now that routine I told you about, how I got up 30 minutes early in my prison cell. I still do that to this day. My wife just absolutely thinks I have lost my mind, but I will get up early every morning, and I have a certain chair I sit in the living room. I make my coffee. I still read my daily reflections. I still read out of the big book. I still recite the step of that month, and I'll say my prayers. When I moved out here, my sponsor and I made the agreement that I would always stay in touch with him. Every night I do a 10-question inventory, and I text it to him, and he texts me his. Every Wednesday, I still call him. When I was in Missouri, I called him at 7 a.m. I was his first call on Wednesday morning. Now, I still call him at 7 a.m. my time, but I'm his last call on Wednesday morning with the time difference. That woman that I moved out here with, on her 30th sobriety birthday, I got on my knee in front of 183 people of Alcoholics Anonymous and proposed to her, and she said yes. We got married this past October the 18th, and there was probably about 330 AAs that was in that ceremony. Our home is full of Alcoholics Anonymous. She has her sponsees over once a month. I have my sponsees over once a month. Our home is open to anybody who wants to come into the recovery, who needs help, or who wants to do anything in this program. We have an open door policy. When I told you at the beginning, I hope you understand that everything good in my life is because of Alcoholics Anonymous. I would not be standing here today if it was not for Alcoholics Anonymous. And I will wrap this up like this. If I will stay in the passenger seat of the car, and I let my higher power drive, who I choose to call God, we get down the road 55 miles an hour in between the white lines. There's one problem with that. I'm an alcoholic. Sometimes I don't like to wait, so I'll grab the steering wheel and I'll put my foot on the gas and start running 80 miles an hour down the highway. And with me driving, the car and my life start going off in the ditch. And as soon as I let go and I get back in the passenger seat, we slow down to 55 miles an hour and we get down the road when we're supposed to. Because if I got to Dallas, Texas when I wanted to, I'd have been playing golf, eating barbecue, and I'd not had dinner that night with Yvonne. Instead, I got there when I was supposed to. I have an amazing life today. I have a wife that loves me. We have a home that is full of Alcoholics Anonymous. And for every one of you in this room who came before me, especially this gentleman with 48 years, I thank you all for my life.
Let's thank our speaker one more time.